we had, we had only a prototype back then. But they looked at the prototype, said, guys, we have never seen anything like that. Let's if you would be in New York, call us. We're on Times Square 4, and maybe we'll give us a visit. And we actually did. So this is how it all started. But I completely agree with Igor. I mean, you have to have an international management team. You can't build an international startup without people who have the experience. You have to have, as Guy Kawasaki said, A players here.
So yeah, I was just going to say, I think someone asked in the previous panel, what are the parameters that an early stage investor looks at? And I think one of the key things, as far as I'm concerned, is people. And you're going to be looking mostly at technical people, but the question you're asking is that technical person going to attract the sort of management team that these guys are talking about? That's the key thing. You don't expect to see a rounded team with a guy who's built a business in the US and a guy who's taken a product out to Asia. But you want to see in the faces and in the behavior and in the knowledge of their business and the passion of the founders that they can attract a top quality global management team. That's part of the judgment, I think, of a very early stage type of investment.
Yeah, just to add the same comment. I mean, you compromise on everything, right? You compromise on, the office space you buy. You compromise on second-hand servers. You compromise on everything you can except people. And that's the one thing you really can't compromise on, because that defines your business, especially at the early stage. I just want to add that, I mean, in terms of, I'm sort of pushing again on this, but I mean, it wouldn't only, for me, to Igor's point, it wouldn't only, to my mind, be sort of difficult to build a large business or a really attractive business from an international investor perspective if you're addressing the Ukraine market alone. It would also be a tragedy, right? Because you've got, at least in my limited experience coming here, you've got just such an outstanding depth of engineering talent here. But you've got some of the very best engineers in the world. And so this is a comparative advantage story. If you can get the really good people in a room together, you've got to be ambitious about what you can achieve. This is not a context in which you should be looking at small local businesses. You should be looking at finding those guys and building a seriously big business that's really, really ambitious.
So I think we're agreed that if you're going to build a business that's going to attract even domestic venture capital, let alone a US or a European, a UK-based fund, you need to be broader than the Ukrainian market. Let's get really, really practical in terms of the priorities of a startup team with very limited capital, very limited time, very limited resources. How do you actually go about making that decision, and what does the right decision look like? And bearing in mind that somebody with international management experience who's got used to living in the cost base of London or New York is probably going to be more expensive than your entire company. So how do you make that decision very practically as an entrepreneur?
I think I'll just kick in a couple of points. One is back to the idea of saying, if you want to get international, there are a few products that are just global by nature, but very, very, very few. I think often what you have to do is actually focus on a couple of markets and get liquidity, and whatever that means to that business. You need to get a critical mass, country by country. And the difference is just in the outlook of saying, are we focused on one country, or are we actually already setting up the dominoes so that the next country will be easier and easier? To address your particular question about the difference in wages or whatever it might be, I think that's any kind of early stage startup, especially if the key players are equity players, the biggest cost is going to be wages. And the more of them that you have that are equity players is going to help keep that burn down. And I think there's a bit of a paradigm shift, even certainly since '99 or thereabouts, and even in the past couple of years, where more and more a company can go from maybe it's 2 million euros or something like that to sustainability, as opposed to needing to raise 10 or 20 million euros in order to get to break even. So if you keep that cost base down. And so to answer your question about, I think you often need somebody on the ground representing you in the key markets that you're after, be it the UK or whatever, and you do have to end up competing for talent, which does end up in cash in some way. The more equity you can provide, the better in that sense. And if you keep all of the other costs down, it extends your runway. That's all I can do.
But anyone else? I just want to, I kind of agree, disagree just slightly with what Alex is saying, because the only footnote I'd add is that that's exactly where kind of institutional funding can help, right? Which is, I agree, in terms of like buying servers and scaling up your R&D practice, you don't need a lot of money, right? Because the stuff's basically free, and it's about talent. On the other hand, when it comes to selling stuff in the UK or in the US, I mean, you're talking pretty serious salaries. And so that's exactly where it's extremely valuable to get international investments in. But I think I distinguish between, especially in this context, between what the founding teams are doing at the very, very early stage, which I guess is sort of the focus of this event, which is really about figuring out how to engage people who don't have the time and are not paying. And actually that's about the proposition itself being compelling. And it's also about finding people, and Paul Graham has this line, right? Every startup is founded on stolen time. And that's essentially what they're trying to do. You're trying to find co-founders who are willing to steal time from their other activities, from the companies they work at. And that's part of the founding team piece. But I think that's very distinct from me, from the kind of the sales and marketing and the big spend stuff which comes later.
But I think you definitely can build businesses and internationalize businesses without having venture or institutional investment. I mean, I've been involved in building 2 businesses, both in really an enterprise space, selling software to telcos, to mobile operators worldwide. And in none of those businesses did we ever have any outside investment at all. We built those businesses to 30, 40 million pound revenue businesses. And the way you do it is, you bootstrap it. You sell something, you have some professional services, you get some cash, you invest it in people. And the other thing you do with those people is you pay them ruthlessly on results, nothing else. So you get a guy in Kuala Lumpur who's going to be your manager in Kuala Lumpur in Southeast Asia, and you say, I'll pay you 20,000 euros or something, but I'll pay you 100,000 euros, 150,000 euros if you deliver $1 million, $2 million, I'm mixing currencies, of revenue this year. In those sort of businesses that you're building out in a bootstrap fashion, you've got to be really hard and make sure these guys are motivated to perform and that their cost hits only when they deliver results. And that's how you can do it.
And nothing impresses an investor more than what we can achieve without money.
Yeah.
If you do that,
I mean, bootstrapping is probably a very lucrative and one of the best options for Ukrainian entrepreneurs. I mean, getting back to the internationalization point, you can probably create a company in Ukraine, and due to the fact that there is no language barrier if you create a web project in Russian, it means that you can access